What's going on, YouTube? Metal Complex here, and welcome to episode 14 of my Sunday series, The Knife Guy. If you don't know where you are, you have no idea who I am, or you just came out of some weird corner of the internet, I am a knife enthusiast, knife collector, knife user, knife enjoyer. I am a knife guy. We are all knife guys and gals in our own social setting, and that's kind of what this Sunday series is about. Um, from the point that you start being interested in knives, whether as a collector or a user, to being, you right now, the obsessive person that's constantly looking through all the different YouTube channels and all the different YouTube videos and wanting to, kind of get that euphoria that's associated with kicking back and watching knife stuff. There's a lot of shared experiences that we all have. And like I say every Sunday, I'm blessed to have a lot of friends in real life in my social circle that enjoy knives that I can talk with. But I know for a lot of you, that only exists online through forums or YouTube channels like this one. So I created this Sunday series to just talk about things that we all experience in one way, shape, or form. We get to, where we are today by taking different paths in this world, but we experience a lot of the same stuff. So today's kind of a special episode. It's one I've been wanting to do for a long time, and I kind of hint at this a lot on Instagram, but I want to talk about the origins, of what starts us down our path as knife guys and gals. Not like the first time we handled a knife, a nice knife, not like the knife that turned you or anything like that. The knife that broke you, I think, was the original. I think Slicey Dicey came up with that and then tagged me in it. Not like that. Like the moment that, the idea of being fascinated with a bladed object exploded into your mind. The moment that fascination was created. And it can be difficult and confusing to come up with, that exact moment. But I've known mine for a while. I've thought about this a lot, and I actually really enjoy thinking about it. And actually, my origins helped me kind of create the theme of this channel. We talk a lot about what the sword represents in my logo, which is Excalibur. And Excalibur represents the ideal folding knife for each of us individually. Excalibur can be, for some people, it could be this Steelcraft series bag. That'd make a great Excalibur. For some people, it's going to be something incredibly exotic. We will talk about this knife, I promise, but I'm not going to talk about it yet. It's just eye candy right now. There's a different way to describe Excalibur, or you don't have to call it that, but the ideal folding knife for any individual person. Anyways, the idea behind that, and kind of if you look at my Patreon, you'll see that there's kind of a knight theme or a medieval theme, and I have really enjoyed that kind of stuff growing up. When I was younger, I was really big into fantasy, and I got a little bit older, and as a teenager, I really liked Lord of the Rings, and like knights and armor and dragons and stuff like. I was a big fan of that, and yeah, you could call me nerdy. But I feel like a lot of people enjoy stuff like that now. Whether you're, it's weird. We talk about like groups of people, like the nerds and the jocks and the goth kids. That doesn't really exist anymore. Like we all kind of exist in this world where it's kind of fun to enjoy stuff like that. Like the Marvel superhero movies. Whenever I hear that somebody doesn't like those, like there's fair criticisms, but when people are like, I've never seen any of the Marvel movies, I don't like stuff like that. That stuff's for nerds. I'm like, what decade are you living in? Like that sounds like something from an early 90s movie where everybody in high school was like, separated out into these really cliche groups. That doesn't really exist anymore. I feel like a lot of us, especially people in the knife world, we like stuff like that. We like, a lot of us like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, fantasy stuff in that, either side of that spectrum. Science fiction stuff we like, superhero movies. I mean, that kind of stuff is fun, So when I dig back or dig deep and think about, what really got me interested, like the moment that I was like, that is cool. And it's like I said, I've referenced this on Instagram a lot, but It was from Disney movies. Specifically, there were two Disney movies. One you can guess, well, both you could probably guess. Sword in the Stone, which was about King Arthur, eventually pulling Excalibur. A lot of you remember that moment. There's a nostalgic warmth to that movie and that specific scene, pulling that sword. The way that and I think it was the way that they drew it. They cast beams of light around it. Remember, he wrapped his hand around the hilt, and the gold like sparkles whenever, and there was like that choral, that choir that came from the heavens, and me as a little kid, being a sponge at that point, I latched onto that. I was like, that's awesome. Like, I want that bladed up, and that need, that want, that desire for that thing that this movie was, making such a big emphasis of, a big fuss about. He finally gets it, and at that point, people realize, oh crap, this kid who's been nobody believed was capable of pulling the sword from the stone. He did, and then became king, and it just had this effect on me. Now, that actually was not, that was one of the movies, but it wasn't actually the first time that I, comprehended what a bladed object or sword. Now, I'm thinking back to very early childhood and watching these movies as a little kid. The very first time I think that I ever saw a sword was in the movie Sleeping Beauty. And to this day, I don't care what anybody says. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, or you haven't seen this scene for a long time, to this day, the most epic scene that I have ever seen in a movie is when Prince Philip fights Maleficent as a dragon in Sleeping Beauty. If you don't remember that scene, go back and pull it up. Do you remember what she says? You guys are going to laugh. Me as a little kid, I'm watching, Prince Philip, who's just, by the way, through that whole movie, that dude is kicking indoors, not wearing armor, just like, got like the typical Disney superhero. He's just like, I don't care what's happening. I'm going to save the princess. I'm going to fight this evil witch. The dude has no fear. It's just a guy on a horse, right? And the fairies give him the sword of truth. I don't know exactly. I mean, it seems like they pulled that sword out of the ether, right? But it's just a very straightforward, symmetrical, blade. Right, it's a very typical looking sword. It's not adorned with crazy, gems and jewels, and doesn't have like a dragon's tail wrapped or, it's not a typical fantasy sword. It's a typical crossguard. It's probably a broadsword. I don't know. It's just animated simple for the fact that little kids are going to be watching it. So this dude is just crashing through gates, and he fights through this briar. This field of thorns, right? And he's on the horse and he's chopping through stuff, and the music's getting super intense, and the horse is like, I'm having trouble with this, and and he's just chopping stuff up. And Maleficent's backed up I think she's at the drawbridge of the castle. And I watched this just the other night. I'm literally getting chills talking about this. I don't know if you guys can tell. Maleficent is backed up against the castle, and she's created an issue. So far, she's demonstrated a little bit of her power. There's lightning everywhere, and she's up on top of the castle, like throwing fireballs down. And there's this thorn, and this dude's just like not having an issue with it. He's just mildly frustrated, right? And it's not really causing that much of a problem. So she sets everything on, or no, not yet. She stops in front of the castle and she says, "I'll never forget this line," because as a kid I was like, "What?" She says, "And now you deal with me, O Prince, and all the powers of hell." And she turns into a dragon. So a lot of stuff happened right here in my little kid brain. Number one, didn't know that she was a dragon. Didn't know that, right? So that's intense. The music is intense. The explosion is literally like a nuclear blast that goes off as far as what Disney was capable of animating at that point. And third, she said hell. That was a swear word. Like when I was a kid, I was like, what? Did she just say a cuss word in a Disney movie? If you guys remember that, if you guys remember watching that as a kid, when I saw it for the first time, it would have been like 1989 or 1990. I'm trying to think of when I would have comprehended it. Maybe I saw it earlier than that, but as far as like my tiny little kid brain comprehending that moment, possibly a 3 or 4 year old which would have maybe 1991. I was like, what? So then that's the only scene where Prince Philip's face is kind of like, oh, geez, maybe I bit off a little more than I could chew. So, but then he snaps out of it, and he's got a wooden tower shield and this sword. And Maleficent lights everything on fire, sets everything on fire. He's on this what's left of this structure, this cobblestone path that leads to the castle, and everything around him is on fire. And this massive 4-story dragon is just coming at him, right? And she's backing him up against the cliff. And this dude is, I mean, from what I see of his outfit, it's a cloth tunic, tights, and what look to be socks made of burlap. So he's backing up against this cliff, and he's swinging this sword like at any moment this dude could be chomped to bits, and he is fighting this dragon. And then there's this I sent it to my buddy it's Endure, who created the logo and the knight with the sword, you know. And I was like, look how iconic this scene is. And it's a shadow cast animated scene where the dragon is basically like backing him up to this cliff's edge, and basically all you see is the silhouette of these two characters surrounded by fire. Like, this dude who has no business being up here fighting this dragon, and he's got a sword which is to this dragon the size of something that you would stick, like a martini sword, like you would put olives on and stick it in a glass. And he's backed up to this cliff's edge, and it's like, how could this dude survive, right? And Maleficent, you know, laughs at him and she blasts the shield away. The shield gets blasted away, falls into the fire, and you can tell how many times I've seen this scene, right? I watched it a lot lately. And so you think like, that's it, you know, like, he's done. What's he gonna do, right? And Prince Philip, you know, the fairies are like, you know, hey, let's, you know, give this sword some magic power. So they do some kind of enchantment, and the sword glows blue. We don't need this. As little kids, we don't need to know exactly what they did to the sword or why they waited so long to do it. You know, it's like, why, if you could do that, why didn't you do it early? But they do. They enchant this sword with some type of power, and they say something like, sword of truth, something, you know, fly true. But basically, we're going to enchant this thing to meet its mark. And Philip yeets that sucker at the dragon and kills her. And that's it. She's dead. She falls face first into this cobblestone cliff, smashes through it, and falls down to this lake of fire. And it's it. And the dude walks off like, oh, that was crazy. And then and just rushes into the print. Makes no big deal. Doesn't even mention it to anybody. For the rest of the movie, it's just, he's like, oh, I'm glad you're okay. And then they go to a dance. Oh, that's crazy. So Prince Philip put this, number one, a completely unrealistic idea of what is expected of men. I always laugh at that, you know, like, because he's such a typical Disney prince. When did this, I'm so sorry, this is such a weird episode because I'm talking about the origins of it, but this is real. Like, this is legitimately what got me interested in folding knives. So it gives me this completely unrealistic idea of what is expected of men. But more importantly, and more related to today's topic in folding knives, it gave me this idea of this sense of power associated with this apparatus that he was using to fight the dragon, this sword. And that was the moment of comprehension for me. That was like, dang, swords are cool. Like, that's awesome. This thing he was swinging around, he was fighting the dragon with it, and the dragon kind of had to work around that thing, you know? I mean, if it weren't for the sword and probably the shield, the dragon probably would have had a much easier shot at him, you know, in his tunic and his burlap socks. I mean, the dragon, or Maleficent, would have just chomped him up or just blasted him away with hellfire. But he didn't. And then Philip chucks it at her chest and puts her in the ground, you know, gives her a dirt nap. So I'm like, that swords are awesome. I want swords. So then, you know, I'm as a kid, like, every stick, you know, is a sword. With all my friends, we're just whacking each other with sticks all the time. And then, you know, And so everything is a sword. You get the little toy swords with things for Halloween. Everything that I did for years, I mean, I'm all the way up until like being 10 or 11, was just like everything was a sword. And I just was so interested in all things that had to do with swords. I loved Power Rangers. Halloween was a blast. Just everything. And then when I got a little bit older, I remember getting my first machete. We lived on the edge of town, and for whatever reason, my parents were like, fine, you can have a cheap machete from Ace Hardware. And I thought that thing was so cool, and I would run around just hacking branches off the neighbor's trees for no reason. I'm sure everybody thought I was a psychopath. But I feel like I'm probably describing a lot of your guys' childhoods too. Especially if you live in the Midwest or somewhere where you've got open country and your parents are like, whatever, give them this big dangerous bladed object. But then, that mixed with the fact that my parents, early on, it was like when I was 9 or 10, that's when my dad gave me that pocket knife, and I enjoyed the idea of having an actual bladed object that wasn't a stick that I had to make believe, and for a while there, bigger bladed objects were more interesting, but I still enjoyed having the pocket knife. And at that point, I was kind of discovering this new joy of having this little thing in my pocket that I could use for little utilitarian tasks, but still, being a kid and wanting to enjoy bladed objects for things that kids do with stuff like that, right? And then I got into high school, and I remember going to a flea market and buying a katana sword I was like 15. And so I thought that was cool because I was like, oh, I have my first real sword, right? Then getting older and then spending a little more money on a pocket knife. And at this point, I kind of realized like, it's kind of weird to like swords. I remember my friends being like, why do you have swords mounted all over the place? And so then I, went through the whole self-conscious thing, but I still liked pocket knives, and that was easier to enjoy because I could keep it in my pocket. And then, the rest is history, basically. You guys know that story. I bought a Kershaw Blur and started to appreciate, because of my past experience with cheaper knives breaking, started to appreciate better and better and better materials. And here we are. Now I have a YouTube channel as a 32-year-old, and I am explaining in a 17-minute episode how Sleeping Beauty and Sword in the Stone influenced me ultimately to become a knife-obsessed knife guy. But that's kind of how I came to be. Now, I know that this particular episode is the point of conversation is the origin is, a thing that we all experience. That we do all have origins, but our origins are all unique. What started us on knives is, for a lot of us, for some of you, it might be exactly the same thing as what I just discussed. Maybe Sword in the Stone and Sleeping Beauty had that exact influence on you. I would imagine a lot of us that were born in the late 80s, early 90s, or actually anywhere from whenever a lot of those movies were popularized, any of us that are anywhere between 25 and probably 50 years old, I would imagine those Disney movies influenced us in a lot of ways. Yeah, like if I dig back, like that's definitely what it was. That's definitely what got me going on it. But anyways, I know a lot of us are going to have completely different experiences. Some of you may not have ever seen those movies. I don't know. I would imagine some of my viewers that are, there are a lot of my viewers who aren't from the United States or aren't from countries where those movies were super, super popular. So you might not know what I'm talking about. And to those people, I would say, the idea here with this episode is that it's kind of fun to think about what got us started in this, and how we got to the point we are today. But that's pretty much it for today's episode, guys. I just wanted to talk about that and kind of explain on camera because I knew I would get really animated and excited about it. But if you enjoyed this video, or at least found it entertaining, please leave a like. If you'd like to take a look at my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like. So check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, then please subscribe to my channel because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.